We have a very interesting panel tonight to quiz and discuss Randall Arndt about some of his views tonight. There is a certain kinship and relationship that exists among the panel. As I introduce them, you'll understand a little bit more. First person sitting to Randall's left is Erin Stark, who in fact finished her finals last night, I believe she said. She's a student at UCF in the graduate planning program. She will be among the second cohort that graduates this spring. Erin was one of my students in at least 2 classes, yeah. So I personally am glad to see that she's be graduating. If there's anyone else in the second cohort, I think they deserve an applause just because graduation time is here. So thank you, Erin, for joining us. She's employed at the Osceola County Planning Department, and her specific interests are in environmental planning, so I'm sure she's learned a lot from what Randall's had to offer tonight. Next, Erin, is April Fisher, who represents the faculty. April has been both a public and a private planner before joining the faculty at UCF, so she brings a practical perspective to the academic environment that we have at UCF, and we do believe that practical experience is equally as important as academic expertise and experience, so we're very, very pleased that April could join us tonight. My relationship with April is really through her husband, Don Fisher, who is one of the region's most, I think, respected and competent county managers. He is in Osceola County, and Don comes to his position as a county manager administrator through planning. So, I mean, I think that speaks to the broad perspective that planning training can provide all administrators. So I thank her for being here. Ginger Hoke is seated next to April. Ginger is the president of her own woman-owned design company. She specializes in trails, open space, and recreation plans, is especially interested in safe access plans that manage to get people to and from schools and from other key destinations, and is a very, very big advocate, obviously, of enhancing the safety for our school-aged children through these kinds of programs. So I'm sure she has a lot to contribute. And finally, I have Andre Vidrine, who is the development vice president for Toll Brothers Residential. Toll Brothers is one of the nation's larger upper-priced single-family home developers. And his relationship to the panel is that Jim Sellon probably raised him from a baby engineer. From a baby engineer to this now very, very successful development executive. And he's also a graduate of the UCF engineering program, so we thank him for being here. One of the advantages of being the moderator is that I get to ask a few questions before I open it up to the audience. And I want to say that, Randall, you had me right here in the palm of your hand, absolutely believing, after listening to Dr. Jackson, that trails and open space are really the answer to great weight loss. I was a little disappointed that we only find out that we have to do other things too, like eat less. One of the things that I wanted to ask you specifically, you know, Ian McHarg originally wrote Design with Nature in 1969, I think, and you're obviously a big advocate, and you were strongly inspired by Ian McHarg. He also wrote some comments about your book, Rural by Design, I think in 1994, 1995, just when it was published, and said that this was, in fact, the book that people needed to read to understand the technical approach to implementing these open space and conservation plans, which is quite a compliment. But when I was thinking about this, you know, this is roughly 30 years since he had written his book. It's now another almost 20 years since you wrote your book. So the question is very simple. How much has really changed? And, you know, how much more, you know, do we need to study these techniques in order to really learn from them? So, I mean, what has been the progression, you know, in this time? How has things have changed to make your views either more implementable or to make our communities see their value?
I think there's been a huge change in perspective, which is reflected in more incremental change on the ground. I'd be first to admit that the preponderance of development is still uninspired by sound planning principles, just following business as usual as defined by planning in the 50s and 60s. One of the big changes, of course, is the greater acceptance by a lot of public officials and the buying public of living on smaller lots, closer together and closer to retail uses. And to that I credit largely the new urbanism, Congress of New Urbanism, because they've shown how you can create beautiful communities that are very, very marketable, even though the homes might be attached, or they might be in 40 or 50 foot frontages instead of 100 or 200 foot frontages. So there's been a great buy-in in terms of accepting mixing of uses and higher densities as opposed to, say, 25 years ago. There's also been a lot more recognition that open space, by developers, that open space is more than just a golf course. 25 years ago, developers realized that open space added value, but they didn't see open space much beyond the 18-hole golf course. So the idea of designing a golf course development without the golf course, substituting greenways for fairways, has gotten a lot of traction around the country and being put into ordinances. Hanover County, Virginia adopted that type of ordinance about 12 years ago, has preserved nearly 6,000 acres of land simply by telling developers, okay, instead of having lots this large, now they're going to be that large, and you're going to still get your density. It may be a density bonus, but you're not, there's no constitutional right to sprawl. So I think we've seen good progress in both, but not as much as I would have liked, given the fact that we're a country with a lot of economic vitality and a lot of intelligent people. There still has been a lot of inertia and not enough planning commissioners get continuing education. I would say that most state and county governments should do far more in requiring that people that sign on to planning boards and planning commissions attend courses to learn progressive planning principles and not just accept the existing zoning as being good enough, because they're there to hopefully improve their community, not just to implement the status quo. I would put more emphasis on continuing education of the, because planners have to get continuing education as professionals, engineers do, realtors do, so many professionals do, but people who sit on planning commissions can come on in a state of complete ignorance and remain there for forever without learning a thing.
Well, then that leads to this next logical follow-up question, which I want to direct to April. As the faculty member that has probably had the most experience in both the public and the private sector, how do your notions of the regulated environment compare with the perspectives offered up by Randall? I mean, do you find it to be as obtuse and conflicting with sensible goals as he suggests, at least in the communities where you've worked, and how are you conveying those views to your students?
The short answer is yes to that. The experience that I've had working in both the public and private sector, the difficulty with inertia is that a lot of times planners are trapped in just enforcing the code that exists, and that becomes their full-time job. It can be difficult if there's not the political will to change a code to embrace form-based or something other than Euclidean zoning. So the one thing that I do talk to my students about is I like what Randall said about thinking 90 degrees from the traditional planner. that's something that I think when you do that as a planner, you can build a rapport with developers, with parts of your community that have a different idea depending on the community they live in, and then also with your political officials. So that if you want to try to influence change to something that you know is going to build a better community, then you have more ability to do that. But you do have to invest in the people that you're working for and with. The one part that I would say that I've seen change based on that inertia is it seems like when there was the economic downturn and so there weren't as many houses being built, it seemed like a lot of political officials started to notice that in terms of sprawl, who's going to pay for everything that's going out into far away from the core. But with the downturn, you couldn't have the impact fees that you had before. And so some of that inertia, I think, came out of those economic conditions as well.
And I'd like to follow that question. I'm skipping you, Ginger, and I'm going to Andre. What's in all this for you as a developer? And are your communities capable of accommodating the kinds of suggestions that Randall's laying out? And how do you respond to the regulated environment, without compromising your goals, objectives, your creativity, but you still have a business plan? And it's your obligation to the community or to your business plan. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that we touch on those things.
I think it's a great question. I'm just pleased to be up here and have the opportunity to talk to these people on the panel and you as an audience, because we're constantly searching and seeking for new ideas and new ways to do things. It's not always standard business as usual. A lot of the things Randall spoke about, I think I'm probably very fortunate in that I work for an organization that does think about those things a lot already. And it's because of, by working with the land, you can a lot of times create value. And where you might lose some density, you might pick up some of that value in lot premiums because you're saving large trees or you're working with the topo of the land. But there's a lot of constraints put on you also that would take a while to get into. But what's important for me sitting up here would also be shared with students at UCF. I grew up here, Central Florida, and I'm a civil engineering grad from here, and I was working for a wonderful firm, and they mixed the planners and the engineers together. So just like when you said you come in and you talk to the municipal planning board, or you meet with your adjacent neighbors, all this is not done in a vacuum. You do have to talk about what this thing's going to look like ultimately. But there's a real practical side of government regulation, the economics, the market demands, common sense. So it's interesting to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions. I'll stop right there for now.
You're so shy. Engineers tend to speak French, I think, and planners speak Latin, so they have a hard time communicating. Engineers, we say, speak from curb to curb, and Randall's back a curb. Ginger, I mean, obviously you must have a lot of affection for the views that Randall laid out as a person who's actually implementing some of these plans or trying to convince perhaps developers in some cases, maybe in some cases communities, to pursue these safe access plans and trail systems. I mean, tell us about your experiences in responding to the suggestions laid out by Randall.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that he says landscape architect every other word, because I am one, and I never even get to say I am one. So, thank you.
And I didn't say that, and I apologize.
No,
I characterize everybody here.
I think that we are trained differently, and I think some of that training needs to probably go into the engineering programs right from the get-go. So I do agree with a lot of the things that you say, except for maybe the planning commissioners that you want to get rid of, maybe not have them go to the school board, because I do the schools. And a lot of times they need to have just as much commitment or passion and education, because a lot of you know in Florida and other areas, the school siting makes a big difference for connectivity and access. So when they have a developer that gives them a school site, then they're thrilled, right? But maybe it's not where the students live, or they have to go further out to get the cheaper land to buy a school site. And then the students can't get there. And they say, well, you know, we just have to bus all of the students. And then all of a sudden they take away some of that busing because it's very expensive. So I think some of the things that I look at are more a big picture. You know, some of the things that you're doing are working with single developers or people that are doing big tracks, where I'm usually trying to piece together things that have been messed up already. The train wreck has already happened. So.
Randall, I personally have one more question for you. I particularly appreciated your example of Missoula, Missouri. I think the rap that a lot of these very intensely planned communities with all this infrastructure and these facilities usually get is that they're very, very costly to construct. You didn't say that they weren't, by the way, but you did particularly point out that your example in Missoula was one of the more affordable. So my question is how do we take these views? How do we take all these good planning and design points and integrate them into a community at a level that makes them affordable to the people that need it? And if we want to go into the data, in addition to getting, of course, more obese, I mean, there's a close income correlation to obesity, which your data doesn't show. So when we start talking about who's heavier than others, it's an income-based situation, and we're, in the most part, seem to be planning communities for at least the more affluent, but certainly not the less affluent.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's nothing inherently more expensive. In fact, it's probably inherently less expensive to develop a greenway community, because the developer will build the same number of homes, or maybe there'll be a density bonus that's, you know, not outrageous. He will have less land to spread his, run his streets and his utility lines. He'll have less acreage to grade, less acreage to clear if it's woods. It doesn't cost more to create a greenway community than it does a non-greenway community, probably a little bit less. Is demonstrably more profitable to do a greenway community because you get instant lot premiums for the lots which are adjoining the greenway or within a block or two of the greenway, because people they want that green space. A study was done years ago that something like only 40% of the people that lived in golf course communities nationwide, probably higher in Florida, but because you got longer playing season, but nationwide 40% of the people in golf course communities played golf, and the rest were there simply because it was a nice green view off their deck. Well, it cost $8 million to create a golf course community, yet developers couldn't build them fast enough, when the obviously much less expensive alternative was staring in the face. Just leave the farm or the horse pasture alone and let people look at that. You can create, through whatever land you have, several swaths of greenways, which will enhance everyone's value, and you might only have to reduce your lot size by 10% or 20%. And that's not enough to decrease the price of the house. I mean, if you were to have a huge decrease in the price and the size of the lot, you might say, well, you can't sell the house for as much, you can't build as big a house. But there's no reason you can't design a new urban, for instance, development with greenways. No reason you can't do a standard suburban development with greenways. They don't add a cost. They add value. And they don't add a cost net, because the small cost that you spend on them, you save even more in not having longer streets, longer utility lines, or more acreage that is cleared and graded.
Fair enough. Aaron, I have a question for you. Actually, a question I'm going to allow you to ask as a student here, to ask the first question. My question to you is someone who is now leaving the program. How do Randall's views and some of the other remarks you've heard, square with your own education and value system? Are these concepts and ideas that you've been exposed to in the program that you know, maybe are selling points to others here, you know, as you reflect back on your 2 or 3 years of coursework here? I mean, is this valuable for you?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Randall said is the enforcement of everything we've been trying to learn over the past several years. And to speak to what April said as well about how the public sector implements those kind of things, I think during the economic downturn, there was a lot of time to build on comprehensive planning. And I think that municipalities have recognized what people want to see, which is what Randall's demonstrating. And so I think that it's a really big deal that there was time to breathe, there was time to build the code, there was time to implement the kind of things that we've been learning about, because a lot of it's theoretical until you figure out how to actually help make it happen. And I think although it was a boon for the economy to have that time to sit and wait for development to come back around, I think it was a big deal to be able to get our ducks in a row and build the comprehensive plan to implement the kind of things that he's demonstrating, and to build more mixed-use districts, more open space code, more trails planning, and now we can implement that as developers come in.
Spoken like a near-term graduate. Thank you. So here's the advantage of getting to sit up here and sit next to Randall. Give you the opportunity to ask the very, very first question from our group of the assembled. Is there something you would like to inquire about specifically that you think is important? I challenge you to give Randall a provocative question, or any of your other panelists a provocative question.
I think because I work in the public sector and we are held to the code, one of the things that I wanted to know from you is, what do you think some of the biggest changes have been that have helped implement what you've been working toward?
I think the changes happen when some people hear some good presentation at a conference and decide to bring that speaker back to their community, so that the people that didn't go to that conference can hear that. It's too much to expect every planning commissioner to go out to every conference, and truth be told, they not necessarily pick the right sessions to hear the thing that's most relevant to their particular community. But I see change in communities happen when 1 or 2 people have read an article or a book or seen a video or gone to a conference and says, this is good stuff. Let's bring a person like me or Ed McMahon from the Urban Land Institute, or a practitioner like Chuck Flink from Greenways Inc., who's a real specialist in this, or someone who can really talk about form-based coding, if that's what they're interested in. Bring that person to the community, and to make it a big deal, maybe invite members of other communities, elected officials and appointed officials in, and make it a symposium. I know Flower Mound, Texas did that not once but twice. And the result has been that they generated enough internal interest among their appointed and elected officials to upgrade their codes. So it's a variation, and you got to get out more. If you just stay in your community and implement your codes, you're just going to be going around in circles and not breaking out of that box. But once somebody hears of a good idea, bring other resource folks in. Could be from the university, could be from a consulting firm, could be from a national nonprofit.
And do they do that to educate the community or the leadership, or both?
Or both, primarily the leadership, but it's the best results are when it's wide open to the community. You invite the realtors, you invite the development community, you invite the Rotary Club and those types to hear it, but the primary audience is your elected and appointed officials. And I also would suggest that if an expert on, who's not a developer, but is an expert in the field, is invited, to have a developer who's actually done the thing that the expert is talking about. Bring a real-life developer in, because the real-life developer who has actually done it is going to bring an extra layer of credibility to the presentation, to the workshop, that the local developers are going to say, well, here's someone like me and he's done this. I'm going to go talk with that guy afterwards, and that's where a lot of the magic happens.
And they can speak to the challenges that they faced.
Yeah.
April, Ginger, Andre, do you have specific questions? I mean, obviously this is about your opportunity to.
I have a question that I have had for years, and so I'm very pleased to be able to ask it of you tonight. After sitting in some of your workshops in the past and getting to hear you speak about particularly your book World by Design, and you talk about your developer clients, and I've always wondered, are your developer clients proactive or reactive? Meaning, did they have a bad experience with local government trying to get a development project through, so they have to go back to square one and they seek your assistance to do that? Or are they doing it before they even go to the local government?
Randall, as you're answering that, I mean, how many of these people have owned land in family trusts and have rich land resources that may not be encumbered with debt? Seaside, for example, was a very extraordinary opportunity, and everybody seems to overlook the fact that Mr. Davis actually didn't have to pay for that land. So I'd like to hear that as you address April's question.
My clients have run the gamut. Actually, very few had bad examples and were kicked around a lot for a year or two, and then someone said, go to this guy and he'll help you. Okay. Or here's a list, and go to somebody on this list, and they're going to lift you out of this trough of this mire that you found yourself in. Some of my clients have owned their land for years and years. Montgomery Farm in Allen, Texas, and the Pines of North Oaks in the Twin Cities area be two examples of that. But many more clients are small-time developers, or they are people that have, I'm trying to think over it's a long list over many years, and I can't generalize. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of people that they may have bought the land for investment purposes. They haven't inherited it. They might have had it for a few years, just waiting for the market to come around. That's quite common. And then they've gone to a conference and they read a book and they well, here's an idea. Let's bring this guy in. So it really runs a very wide range, but not many have come to me and said, I've got a plan that's going nowhere. I want you to fix it. I say I can't fix it. I'm going to replace it.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I have a question on, do you have problems with either the people that are going to be moving into the houses, or the developer, or just the society in general worrying about crime, crime prevention through environmental design? Do you do all of that right at the same time? I mean, there's a lot of perceptions of safety on trails and things like that. How do you address that?
Well, a lot of my projects are trails within the development and not part of a larger system. Although I really like the opportunity to design along a larger system, which I've done from time to time. And in the Raleigh-Durham area, where I did such a design, actually Chuck Flink's wife bought a lot in one of my subdivisions, and she, because she knew her husband would be pleased to live in a subdivision with a greenway again. It's sort of a settled issue by that time. Early on, in the early 80s, crime was still an issue among developers and maybe some potential home buyers. Should they buy a lot that backs up to a trail? And in every community where a public trail, a truly public trail is proposed, you've got to respond to people with these fears, based totally on ignorance and not at all on fact. Most of the trails that I have designed are within developments, accessible to people from neighboring developments, but not part of a public trail system, and therefore it's not risen to the level of sort of public discourse. Should we have a rail trail here, as opposed to the old railway line, or should we create this public greenway trail? When I do come into contact with that situation, I recommend that the local officials invite police officers from communities not far away that do have public trails. So the police officers can come and say, or at least they can write a letter, say, these trails are not corridors of crime. They're not where people are attacked in general. You're more likely to be attacked in your house, or you're more likely to be attacked in a parking lot late at night, but you're not likely to be attacked on a trail.
Right. I guess I'm thinking that everything will be coordinated and connected sometime, like a true master plan would show,
Oh, yeah.
like the communities that you're doing, connecting everything so that there's really a truly connected region.
It's not uppermost in their minds when it's one or two properties that are being developed along a potential trail network. It's when someone says, we'd like to have a big public trail going through your community. Remember Hadley, Massachusetts, the farmers came out and said, the rail line used to go through my farms, and now you're going to have all these cyclists, and our wives and daughters will not be safe. And they were passionately, they passionately believed the nonsense they were speaking. And it had to take the police chief from Northampton, Massachusetts, and Amherst to come out and say, look, you guys, this is not a corridor of crime. If anything, it's going to make that trail safer, because unless it's a bike trail, you can get all kinds of people kind of hanging out there because there's no eyes on it. It's just kind of an abandoned right-of-way.
Right.
But if you make it a trail, it's going to be well used, and you're going to be safer, and your property value is going to go up. But it took some straight talk from the police to bring the farmers around, and I'm not sure that they all came around, but they just clammed up after a while.
That's where with your experience, Ginger. I mean,
Well, I used to work for Seminole County, and we did trails there, and a lot of times people that lived right against the trail, right along the trail, did not want it. So we did have to prove, well, your property values will go up, and they would put up the fences, and then the fences would come down after the trail was up because they wanted to get to the trail. So it does work out, and the more trails you have, the more accepted it is. But I just think if you're doing single communities, it's just better to make sure that there's a master plan in general all the way around so they connect.
Yes.
Appreciate you bringing it out. All right, do you have at this point a question based on the collected comments that have been made?
I think what we're talking about, if we're talking specifically about healthy communities or conservation communities, a lot of things I've heard tonight are when you're in an area that's not really urban, there's different concentric rings of how much density you're going to have, right? So depending on how expensive the land is, because it all goes back to land. That's where it starts at. And depending on how far out you have, and depending on what those existing densities are and what you're trying to rezone them to become, it incentivizes landowners or developers or municipalities to create the opportunity to do what you're doing. What you're doing is pretty magical, because it's difficult to save half the land. It's hard. But if you have a motivated land seller and an area that there's a market for this product that you're trying to provide, there's enough transportation and concurrency. Concurrency is a big issue. We haven't really talked about that tonight, but to have enough capacity in schools and roads and fire protection. And so there's so many driving factors in this. The things I've heard are when you're in more of a rural setting and you're trying to create maybe linkage pathways between two really dense areas. It's interesting, but a big part of this also that I would encourage our planners growing up here and graduating is to talk to the legal side, the land use attorneys. I hope y'all, I'm not sure part of the curriculum is dealing with land use attorneys or not and law, but that is a huge part of what you do as a developer is you're constantly dealing with litigation and rules and constraints that don't allow for a lot of things we want to do. You're forced into a box. And between being forced into the box, the legal side of it, and the cost of the land, it's tough.
And now
Yeah,
you're
so-
speaking Dr. Beisch's language.
I'm not saying
Of course
anything.
he
So we got
teaches
the
word of
engineers who
mouth.
think curb to curb, and we got the lawyers who think docket to docket. I'd like to open it up to our audience. I mean, I think we've had a chance to express some views here among ourselves. I mean, to see if there are any particular questions that we haven't raised, issues that we haven't commented on. Mercedes? Well, yes, Mercedes. I don't know other Mercedes here.
Okay, so my name's Mercedes, and I'm a student at UCF. Oh, sorry. Hey, Hector.
This is always Hector's job, by the way.
Oh, you hold it? Okay.
He does this better than anybody I know.
Wow. It's a pleasure. So I guess a question that we haven't, or a topic that we really haven't discussed when it comes to the greenways, which of course we all know the benefits of having them, and I'm a huge advocate for them, is what happens, or if you could, the whole panel, give recommendations to us planners on how we can mitigate eco-gentrification so that all people of socioeconomic and demographic differences can also enjoy these benefits.
Wow. Who would like to tackle that one? I think it's got your name on it.
Well, if you require all developments to have some level of greenway in them, all developments, will have them, and all income groups will enjoy them. It should not be something just for an upscale market. Those are the ones that can most afford it and perhaps least need it, because their diets tend to be perhaps a bit healthier. Also, to the extent that you do public trails, like Ginger was talking about, it might be a countywide trail or a trail that goes several miles, that can easily connect different levels of socioeconomic neighborhoods and schools, providing access to the trail to everybody. The one that I biked on in Rhode Island for 12 years went through all kinds of neighborhoods and passed 3 schools and 2 village centers, and it was one of the best models, and it sort of happened accidentally. Because the schools were already there. The schools just happened to be along the rail line for no reason and it wasn't much of a rail line. It was just a little spur from the New York to Boston line, and it went to the coast to bring summer visitors, and then it went out of business in the 1960s. So a public trail that goes long distance will connect a lot of neighborhoods, hopefully, and the private trails, even if they're not yet connected to each other, should serve moderate income neighborhoods and average income neighborhoods and above average income neighborhoods equally. I've never seen a development where I couldn't put a greenway trail system in. And the greenway trail system that I'm talking about tonight wouldn't have to be the full, say, 50% that Andre was talking about. That was from a different context in yesterday's ULI session. So a greenway might be 5 to 10% of the land area.
Andre, I'd like to get your view on that.
I'm a big proponent of greenbelt systems. I do. In fact, you'd probably be kind of happy with some of the stuff we're designing right now. And it does. It adds value, especially when you bring in the architecture side of it. We haven't talked a lot about architecture, but definitely you should be hanging out with the architects as well. The spatial planning they do creates value, and along with the landscape architects. So it's a team. I tell you what's really neat is my job's so neat, because I get to surround myself around a bunch of people that are smarter than me, put them all in a room, give them a task, and say, what do y'all think? And you hear all the different sides of it, and what you have to do is you have to take all those different opinions and challenges they bring up and be solution-oriented and work with people and just keep grinding on it till you come up with a solution. The green belts that we try to do, in fact, Baldwin Park, it is an amazing community. It really is. They were able to do that partly because of the value of the land. They got the land at a reasonable price. There's incentives that were given by the city. The timing in which it was built is amazing. I don't know if you'll ever seen that type of city built that quickly again. It's a lot of unique circumstances that came to make that what it is. We recently tried to do some muse designs. Muse, when you have, you just load the houses with alleys, and instead of being facing each other on a street, it's a park. We talked about it earlier. It's great. You're saving the money on the curb and the asphalt and such. You still have the utilities going through there. So then you talk to the utility department. They don't want the utilities going through there. Why is that? Well, you're going to put parks in there, aren't you? Well, yeah. Well, how are we going to access it if we have to repair the pipe? We don't want to have to tear up all the landscaping and the sidewalks. And okay, so we got to put these over here. And then how the power company gets to there? Well, where's the easements for the power company? So a couple of those things get factored in, and but mostly a lot of times it's the depth of the lots you need and your constraints of geometry. I'm almost rambling here, but here's where I'm going with this. In the alleys, what has to get back there? A fire truck. So if we don't have enough parking outside in front of the house, because people have more than 2 cars, most people do, if you have a large family. And so the fire trucks have to have access. You have to have certain widths for that. And then you got garbage pickup. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. So we do it where we can, and it's a huge value add. But back to what I can bring tonight to the panel might be just some practical constraints that are put upon you as well.
Okay, do you have a question? Oh, everyone?
My name's Emily Hanna. I'm a student also with the MSURP program. And my question kind of mirrors what Mercedes asked, but mine talks a little bit about how do you retrofit existing communities that don't have rail lines that abut them and don't have right-of-ways next to them? How do you retrofit them to allow them to have green spaces, to access some of the things that we talk about in planning healthy communities, like access to food and exercise? And how do you begin to retrofit these older communities, especially in Central Florida, because we have a plethora of them?
I think this is a question for anybody that wants to try to answer it.
I'm happy to go.
I mean, Ginger, I'd like to hear
that
your
one, yeah.
views. I mean, Andre's pretty much a greenfield guy, but.
You know, there's several ways, but you have to use everything in your arsenal. I do a lot of master planning, and I spend a lot of time in Google Earth and Street View, and I spend a lot of time looking at the parcels and finding easements that people have planted a hedge over and things like that. There's things that were probably built into that development that have long been buried and hidden. And sometimes you can go through, there's a retention pond, and add a trail connection through there. Sometimes a church property is nearby, you can go through there. Sometimes even through a school property, believe it or not. That's harder to do with security now. But there are ways to do it, but it's always, there's not something that you're going to find in a code or a book about it. You have to sit down and figure it out or drive it. Sometimes you can take a street and do a road diet and use part of that road for the trail. Sometimes you have to live with just bike lanes and sidewalks for connections. But I go for it all. I've gone right through parking lot after parking lot. I'm like, well, let's put this in here instead of putting it on the road. And you had to work with each business owner to redesign their parking lots to get the trail through there. So it can be done.
Well, have you dealt with that in any type of regulatory, easement?
The way that I've had to deal with that, not from a greenbelt scenario or trails, but probably similar. A lot of times in community redevelopment areas, there is a need to retrofit to bring certain design elements in. So brick streets that have been buried and asphalted over, a lot of times if they want to underground utilities, then trying to figure out how to do that and get the easements necessary. So sometimes in a redevelopment master plan, that's where you have the ability, looking long term, to write into that plan mechanisms where as properties develop or redevelop, that there's some type of dedication that is provided for before that redevelopment takes place. So that's one mechanism you can do that.
So it's kind of an incremental effect.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we're always looking for these broad, sweeping, magical solutions, and incrementalism seems kind of very important here. Any other comments about, based on Emily's question?
Well, if the existing streets are overly wide, they're excessive because they were built to AASHTO standards from the 60s. which didn't go away until maybe 10 years ago, until they, I think, were shamed into upgrading their standards by the American Society of Civil Engineers, which was a decade ahead of AASHTO. Maybe you can get your municipal engineer and the fire department to agree to make the streets a little bit less wide, bring the curb in, and still have one row of parking as opposed to 2 rows of parking and 2 lanes, and have a much wider sidewalk area, much broader sidewalk, and more tree plantings. And it costs money to push the curb out and to plant more trees. But if you can't find other places to do particularly attractive green pedestrian connections, that might be one of them, because those streets are actually dangerous by design. They're far too wide, far too straight. People go far too fast. They're unnecessary. And over time, this is the economic argument, over time, the community is going to be spending more money repaving a road which is unnecessarily wide, so why not just bite the bullet and make it skinnier and take the future money that it would be spending on repaving the extra width and putting into something that makes it safer.
Yeah, one of the best examples we have in Orlando by far is probably the activity that's taken place on Edgewater Drive, which shrunk probably 2 lanes over a period, I don't know, of about 5 miles. And that certainly has become one of the most valuable commercial and subsequently valuable residential corridors, because it spirited a lot of additional condominium development. So, I mean, it can happen, but I'd posit that it's probably very, very expensive to implement that, even if the long-term consequences are as valuable as we're discussing. Other questions? Questions? Yes, sir.
I appreciate your workshops that I've attended and your books. And it always amazes me that the lay people that attend those workshops always picked up your what you were saying, all the little tricks and stuff. And when they came out and you formed your 15 or so groups and they did their design of the piece of property that you had selected, that they came out with some very good ideas. So it's not just the professionals you need to talk to. You need to start with ideas from the layperson and work up. And the other comment I had is, or question is that with the burst of the real estate bubble, people were forced out of their homes and went back into apartments. Well, those people that moved down here to the Sunshine State and ideal was that suburban house with the lawn and maybe a pool in the back, got tired of it because they realized they got to cut grass or pay somebody to cut grass every week, and it's not cheap running a pool. And when they got back into the apartments, they realized that the upscale apartment living had a lot of benefits. They didn't have to worry about the property tax, the saving money for the real air conditioner and the roof and stuff like that. And I was wondering, have you seen a pattern of, I wouldn't say upscale, but apartment complexes now using your ideas and developments within their complexes themselves?
That's a good question.
It is a good question, but the answer is no, I haven't seen that. I would defer to other people on the panel, and I think that some people at the national level that really have looking at national trends in development, like Ed McMahon, who's a senior resident fellow at the ULI. He would probably be able to give you half a dozen good examples of where that's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, you
actually, now that I think about it, the Post apartment complex in Baldwin Park that was recently built actually has a community garden. They do have the green, the paths between the buildings. There's the architecture is facing. They're making the distance between the buildings a little bit larger than it needs to be per the code probably, and they're turning the architecture inward and having paths trails through there. So they're living on 3 sides of the building, if you would. and they're a lot more intentional of their paths. That's a great one to study. That would be.
I have a comment about that. I think we have really seen that, not just that people are moving into apartment complexes necessarily, but with the push for mixed-use development. I think that's because people are downsizing. We have a growing elderly population, but people don't necessarily want to live in an apartment complex and feel trapped inside where they can't go anywhere and there's nothing to do and they're so close to their neighbors. So I think that the codes are responding to that, and I think, you know, Orange County is moving towards a more form-based code so we can see commercial and residential closer together, and I think that's brought on by the fact that people want to live in smaller residences and places that they don't have to mow the lawn. And so I think we're responding in maybe a different way, where there's not just apartment complexes being built, but that the whole environment is shifting to accommodate those smaller residences.
Other questions, comments? Panel, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make, starting with Andre?
Just everybody's here talking about this stuff. As long as everybody gets in a room and we all communicate, it's going to work itself out.
Ginger?
That's the best thing I can say tonight.
I feel like I've been doing this for years. Where's everybody? Come on, let's just, you know. I see Al Hill back there, and we did this at Seminole County, didn't we, Al? I mean, we've been doing trails forever. We do have plenty of private-public partnerships that we did with Seminole County. So
Well, I guess we know that the legislature just passed $15 million to broaden the trail system, at least the eastern segment through maybe more or less through Lake, so that's kind of exciting.
The one thing I would add is that as a planner, one of the most important things to me is how people define their community. One of the things that I loved that you had written about and talked about, because I've always struggled with new urbanism, that it seemed fabricated. So what hit it for me is when you said that new urbanism plus planning for green spaces and putting that together, that provides people the opportunity for community, because then they have some place to go walk, converse, and build that community.
Final thoughts, Erin?
Yeah, I
Give
just
your
think,
final thoughts.
you know, comprehensive planning, I think that's the role of the public sector, and I think looking at it at a larger scale instead of just piecemeal development can add to the individual trail systems that he's working to build on the smaller scale. So I think keeping that in mind and knowing that you have the ability to do that and envision the environment in new ways in a comprehensive manner is still valuable.
I guess my concluding remark is that there's never before been a greater need, I think, for counties and other jurisdictions to map out greenway networks and to make it more than just a plan and a policy and a hope and crossing fingers, but to have parallel regulations, LDRs, that say if you're going to be developing land, and it could be residential, mixed use, commercial, industrial, just standard subdivision, you must have greenway connections running through your property as we've mapped that, and further fingers, little tributaries that will be more fine-grained, that will bring people through that, because that will connect the communities in very important ways. But unless we map it out and make it a requirement, one of the first communities in North Carolina to do greenway planning simply had a 5% dedication. And today they've got, you know, like 50 miles of greenways. A lot of them followed the sewer lines through the stream valleys, and others just, you know, through the middle of the subdivisions in wandering, meandering paths. You only get it if you map it and you're serious enough about mapping it to make it a requirement, not just, oh, we'd love to see you do it. Developers do a lot of things because they're required to do them. They do some other things because they feel it's, you know, will enhance their product. The better developers probably don't need that kind of requirement, that the greenway be an integral part. But not every developer is the better style of developer. They come in all sizes and shapes and stripes. So in order to have consistency, we should just have a greenway requirement, whether it's a new urban development, whether it's an industrial park, a mixed use in a downtown. It could be a plan-led regulation which will give you the result. Would we have sidewalks in our developments if they were not a requirement? Some developers would put in the sidewalks and others wouldn't. So if something's important, okay, it might be the stormwater system, it might be the sidewalk. If greenways are important, they should be part of the infrastructure. Not just the gray infrastructure, but the green infrastructure. And I'll shut up now.
This is the point at which I thank the panel for their comments. I certainly thank Randall for being here and traveling a great distance. But I mean, I think I really do want to thank our panelist guests for taking time out of their schedule to be with us this evening. And apparently, Andre, you were involved in ULI, so thank you for doing that. And let's give our panelists a hand. I have a couple.